So man, it's good to be back though. I mean, like I was looking at my Skype and it said you haven't chatted like on Skype with Chris Taylor in 9 months. I was just
That
like,
seems wrong.
I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like that was
Well, in
2020, I guess.
9 months, yes, 9 of the longest months ever.
Yeah, they were. It's yes,
But
it's definitely more than it felt. It's felt like more than an era in Doctor
hmm,
Who terms. Um,
you could say that we were pregnant for 9 months, and we've birthed a brand new podcast
I like that.
that
I like that idea.
looks a little bit like the old podcast, but under the hood, it's all different.
Yeah, that's a charitable way of describing what went down, and I'm going to go with it. It's good. It's kind of revisionist history, but you know what? We're talking about a show where time is fluid, right?
Exactly. Time can be rewritten.
Time can be rewritten. That's it. That's the line. Um, you're good with the lines. But yeah, so we're back. You know, we're doing podcasts again. We'll hopefully be a little more on the regular. This is, of course, the Pull to Open podcast. It's a Doctor Who podcast from a couple guys who love the show, even though you might be hard pressed to feel that sometimes when we're talking about it.
We criticize because we love.
Exactly, we're here to love.
Yeah.
Because who do you love? Um, to borrow a good name suggestion that we had, we almost called the
Yeah.
podcast that, and then
I still like it.
I still
But
like it too. In my hurry to upload, I the first time I picked Pull to Open, and you know things aren't permanent. Again, time can be
I
rewritten.
like Pull to Open too. Maybe we can also investigate whether there's a randomizer based name out there
Oh, I
that we
like
could
it.
switch the podcast to, because I think that is, and that's probably what we should get to
Yeah,
discussing straight up, is what makes this podcast different
for
from
sure.
every other Doctor Who podcast out there is the fact that we have our phases set to random. We are evading the Black Guardian with our TARDIS Randomizer.
Exactly. We pick an episode every week that we're going to talk about. We pick it up we're going to pick it the previous week. So at the end of this episode, we're going to activate our TARDIS randomizer, and we're going to look at all the seasons of Doctor Who. So from 1963 till the most recent Jodie Whittaker stuff, and pick a season, and
Hmm.
then within that season, we will pick an episode. And
Yeah, we are using we're using highly advanced randomizer technology from Google. Um, the Google random number generator is how we do this. Basically, pick a number between one and what is it now? 38
yeah,
total Doctor Who
I think
seasons.
it's a
So
matter of, as you say, controversy as to how many seasons there are, because there were 26 in the
well,
original.
yes.
And honestly, if you look at the new series screwed everything up because they had all these specials, and some people
Mm,
consider those their own thing. Production wise, they were kind of their own thing, but we're going to treat those as kind of like just part of uh, David Tennant's last season, and all the Christmas specials we're going
yep.
to attach, and New Year's specials will attach to the appropriate season they're next to, so that
Yeah, I'm going by other advanced technology here, known as the Wikipedia list of Doctor Who episodes 2005 to present.
nice.
Which, yeah, so however Wikipedia organizes their series is good. We're not obviously counting Series 13 because it doesn't exist yet. We don't have the technology, unfortunately, to jump into the future to watch Doctor Who episodes.
But stay tuned.
Uh, but stay tuned. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we are never in this podcast going to have this technology. We'll work on it.
Yeah.
You
Maybe
know,
maybe not by
extracurricular.
the end of this podcast, but do stay tuned to the end of this podcast where we will activate all the great technology we've just been
Yeah.
talking about, and then pick another episode, the one that we will record next.
Yes.
All right.
So we did this. We did this offline. We had a
Right.
little call to
Yeah.
get the gang back together,
We had
and
this is the genesis story of this new
mm,
era of Pull to Open. So we did. Yep.
yes, and it took us to season 21, which is Peter Davison's last season, and that has special resonance for you, right, Pete?
I can't tell you, Chris, how happy I was that the first episode back was one of the ones I grew up with. So I started with Davison way back in, I must have been like 9 or 10. when I first discovered Doctor Who on PBS, and they were doing daily back then. So they were doing episodes from Davison 5 days a week, and they also had sort of some full adventures from Tom Baker on the weekends. And so Davison was my doctor. He was my first doctor, and I'm was for the longest time obsessed with that era of the show. It was, as a child of the '80s, I was very like, it's so '80s, that era. Like, it's so incredibly '80s. And John Nathan Turner really 80s-fied the show. Obviously at the time that was just making it modern and contemporary with other things being produced. But, looking back, it's like, holy cow, they really leaned into '80s.
They did, and in the show we'll discuss just how '80s things got, because I think in a way what we selected was like the height of the '80s. But we should end the suspense. There are 7 serials, and this I think is an important distinction, just to not dwell too much on the randomizer and the logistical details of it. But what we're watching are serials or stories, right? So that means in the new series, that's going to mean generally 1 episode, sometimes 2. And in the old series, it's going to mean 4 and sometimes 6. And whenever we get to the war games, like 10 episodes.
Right.
So it's going to be a lot. But there are just 7. Right. By the way, we should also say Trial of a Time Lord. If we ever do that season, I want to just up front that we're going to treat it as separate stories. I think the way God intended.
You know what? I think that's the right call. That's the right call.
Yeah.
Because
otherwise, we'd have to watch
I don't have
the
time, bro.
I tried to defend Trial of a Time Lord at the time, but yeah.
Well,
anyway, let's hope we avoid Colin Baker for now.
We're not here to talk about Trial of a Time Lord, though. We are here to talk about.
But speaking of Colin Baker, he comes in at the end of season 21. That is officially the end of the season, the Twin Dilemma. So we had a 1 in 7 chance of opening this new version of the podcast with a Colin Baker serial.
Oh, that's true. Yes, that's a very unusual season to end the season with his first story.
I don't think they've ever done that before or since.
Yeah.
We also had a 1 in 7 chance of hitting the Caves of Androzani, widely renowned as one of the best, if not the best, Doctor Who serial of all time.
I believe it was voted that in Doctor Who magazine a number of years ago now, but I know they do their surveys every year, so it might have been. I'm sure it's still up there, but
it was recently overtaken by Day of the Doctor, which I think is the right call.
That is the right call.
But yeah, every other Doctor Who podcast would take you straight to the Caves of Androzani. And we'd be talking about what we think about that classic show and what does it say about, we'd be looking at the pinnacle of Doctor Who. No, the randomizer does not do that for us. The randomizer takes us to the episode and the story before the Caves of Androzani. That's right, we landed on Planet of Fire.
Planet of Fire. That is story 134 and serial 5 of this season. And it is actually an episode that I was a little bit I was obsessed with all of Davison, but I was, for some reason, particularly this one, I found interestingly, I watched it a lot. I remember back in the day, and as I hadn't watched it for probably a couple of decades going into this, but I still remember so many of the beats and so many of the reveals. It was very interesting,
fascinating.
Yeah,
because I definitely watched it at a time. But I have no memory of it at all. And I was going to say the little remembered story, Planet of Fire, but that would be wrong because you remembered it. You carried the flame.
I carried all these years. Flame.
You carried the flame for Logar.
It was such a this whole season, and we'll get to the episode specifically in a second. This whole season, particularly the end, is so momentous. I mean, it brings back old enemies. It has companions leaving, companions coming in. Obviously, there's a regeneration in the Caves of Androzani. And we can get to it later, but one companion, which was barely a companion, but sort of ends in the most brutal way. And they even tried to sort of give some finality in this episode to one of the major villains. So it's like there was a lot going on in this season.
Yeah, it had a sort of wrapping all of Doctor Who up feel to it.
Like, exactly.
It's a little weird.
They were trying to load, like, it's almost like Peter Davison was like, as John Nathan Turner at some point, like, can I do all this stuff before I go? And they were like, yeah, sure. We'll bring back.
I don't know if the BBC is going to fire me, so I'm just going to jam it all in and accidentally create one of the greatest stories of Doctor Who in the process, and also Planet of Fire. But
I wasn't sure what you were referring to there. I mean, like, it's pretty good. Anyway, we'll get to the judgment on this episode a little later, but like this one opens up pretty interestingly. Like, I mean, you're kind of right away. They spent some money on this one.
Yes, they spent some money on the plane tickets to Lanzarote.
Yeah, so and they actually set it in Lanzarote. So we begin with this, these people doing sort of an archaeological dig.
Before we jump into that, can I just mention how the TARDIS randomizer worked extra randomly in my case?
Please do.
And we should also mention BritBox, which is how we're watching this.
And if they ever want to sponsor the show,
I was going to say, unless BritBox wants to sponsor the show, I think BritBox is kind of the nemesis of the show because I could not click on Planet of Fire directly. Their UI, I've discovered some major flaws in it, and I could not for the life of me, trying repeatedly restarting my Apple TV, restarting, logging out of BritBox, logging back in, could not click a Planet of Fire directly. The only way, and this is very TARDIS-like, I could get there is to go to the end of Resurrection of the Daleks.
So strange, man.
Go to the
I've got to say, so this is just a general comment I have about streaming apps. I think once you get outside your major ones, like your Netflix and your Amazon Prime and those kind of things, which are obviously backed by big technology companies or are big technology companies, you kind of like the quality of them and the reliability of them sort of drops rapidly. And I didn't have that problem specifically, but I will say in trying to watch Planet of Fire on my Fire TV, and I have the little sort of square puck that is maybe 2 or 3 years old now.
Very appropriate.
The audio was out of sync, and I couldn't for the life of me fix it. Like it's just slightly enough to annoy me, that it wasn't syncing up to the lips. But I lived with it, I got through it. It was fine, but again, I don't think this is necessarily by design of BritBox. I just think. And I checked on my phone. I thought for a second, is it the print? Did they do a bad dub? And no, it's actually perfectly synced on my phone. So clearly the raw material is okay. It's just for whatever reason the app on my Fire TV does not sync it properly. So that's a little
so weird.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And
hopefully BritBox is also one. It's one of the few apps that unfortunately makes you create a registration and log in before you can watch it, and won't restore your purchases or anything like that if you go through Apple.
Oh wow!
You're sort of used to that app. So
stay tuned for other podcast streaming app review coming up shortly to the podcast app that you love most. But
I think if people are listening to this, maybe they want to check out Planet of Fire, maybe they too have been holding a torch for it for years. They're going to need to use BritBox because that is as far as I understand, the only way to watch the classic series unless you're in the UK.
Yes, I believe so. It's hard to keep track of what's on which service, but unless you're going to go really old school and buy a bunch of DVDs, or Blu-rays these days. I mean, these days, man, I sound so old.
Kids these days with their Blu-rays.
Kids and their Blu-rays, their iPhones. My day, we didn't have any of that. We had to wait every week for a new show.
Kids in their BritBox. I know that was something I was thinking throughout this experience. Was like I actually waited a week between these so-so episodes.
Well, funny you say that.
That sort of enhanced it.
I decided once I realized we were doing an old episode and we were doing something that was episodic. I actually watched this serialized through 4 nights.
Oh,
So I watched part one, then I wait part two, and I actually think there was 2 day gap between two and three, and then four, and then which was interesting. I wanted to see if I could feel that like, ooh, I want to see what's next,
yeah.
and I kind of got there, and we'll get to it. But one of the episode cliffhangers is really really good. Um,
Interesting. I think
so
I can tell which one you mean
I'm
because
sure you
there are three
can.
that really not good. Um,
So
anyway, so I landed in Resurrection of the Daleks. You know, there's
mhm,
all of which is to say BritBox is our nemesis. A, B, BritBox. Let's talk about sponsorship, and this could change. Um, C, I landed in Resurrection of the Daleks, and
hmm,
it sort of felt like the TARDIS was taking me there for a reason, because it is, you know, it's January 2021 when we're recording this. The previous Doctor Who I'd watched was Revolution of the Daleks, is it?
right,
The
the most
latest
recent.
Jodie
Yeah.
Whittaker. So to go from that, in which we have Daleks and say goodbye to companions, to the last episode of Resurrection of the Daleks, being forced to watch that to get into Planet of Fire, where we have lots of Daleks and say goodbye to a companion, Tegan.
Right.
It felt meaningful. It felt like the randomness had brought me to the right place.
And it
So
offers a bit of context for the beginning. I got to
yes,
say, we're not here to review Resurrection of the Daleks. Hopefully that's next week. But I find Tegan's leaving scene very epic. I think
mm,
it's like Janet Fielding, who you really watch her grow as an actress throughout her time there. She really nails it. The music's great. The back and forth is great. You really feel it, and I think in sort of setting up, and I don't think this is necessarily all that conscious in the script, but in setting up sort of the Doctor's mindset in this one,
mm.
because he is very undoctorish sometimes in Planet of Fire. Um,
He's miserable. He is miserable and sad and bordering on evil.
well, there, and we'll get there. Certainly, by the
Yeah.
last episode of this serial, you're really like this is again. I think why this is such an epic season, and this story is actually quite good. Um, he's in a different mindset, and it's you know Peter Davison, you know he's relatively light, and his whole manner is rather friendly, I think, but in to the extent that he can be take his version of the Doctor to a dark place, I think that's really embodied
Mm.
in this episode,
Yeah, it's
and
a lot of
embodied well.
foreshadowing for Caves of Androzani as well. It's sort of it's a nice lead in to that,
Yeah.
his performance throughout
Notably,
this.
this episode is written by Peter Grimwade,
Mm.
who has been with the show for a long time, in one way or another, or had been at that
He
point.
got to write Turlo's introduction in Mordred Undead, the
Yes,
previous season.
yes. So it made a lot
and
of
and he's
sense.
back now to do Turlo's ending. But reputedly, it's not all him. Supposedly, he got really upset about the different demands that they were making on him for Planet of Fire, and basically quit halfway through writing it, or
Right,
halfway
I
through
read about that
rewriting it.
too. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
It's an interesting backstory. I know there was also some talk about they set it on Lanzarote because someone's wife had recently vacationed there, and so rumor is John Nathan Turner just wanted to like have a production where he was on vacation or something, and you know it all lends to the idea, like we were saying earlier, maybe he thought this was going to be his last season. I don't know.
Yeah, it
Um,
was so weird that they take it from a quarry in Surrey, where Doctor Who is almost always set, and they go to the one island in the Atlantic that has the most quarry-like feeling to it.
Doctor Who
Which
cannot
is
avoid quarries. Never has. But yeah, it's written
yeah,
by Peter Grimwade. So we can get right into it. So it opens
let's do
up
it.
a lot of location shooting here, and they use like to what extent the quarries are varied on Lanzarote. They use Lanzarote to represent both this alien planet, which we come to soon find out its name's Sarn,
Mm,
and as well as Lanzarote itself. So we open up with the alien planet actually with these sort of primitive looking people kind of climbing a mountain,
mm.
or as you kind of rapidly figure out, it's a volcano. Trying to sort of find something, and they don't find it because they were determined not to find it, which is that they were, they as one of them proudly says, Logar, which is apparently their deity, this community's deity, does not exist. Deity, sorry, my bad. Oh man, I'm editing that out. You know I'm editing that out.
No, it's great. This is what we're now going to call all Doctor Who deities. Deities.
You guys.
Deities.
I read a lot. I don't pronounce a lot. Anyway, they get up there and they could proclaim he doesn't exist. So it's kind of interesting. It's some backstory. I got to say, I like the guy who plays Amiand. He's quite good.
Yeah, he's the one who takes over in the end, right? Spoiler alert.
Yeah, supposedly.
Yeah.
But then we rapidly transition to being this archaeological expedition off the coast of Lanzarote itself on Earth.
Mm.
And we're quickly introduced to a couple people, Howard and Perry.
Yes,
So,
Perigilium.
Yeah.
Or Perpigillium.
Perpigillium. And there's obviously Perry's first appearance. It is it's an odd
it's an odd introduction.
Yeah, it's not an odd introduction. I mean, it's an odd choice, I was going to say, about her speech. I think Nicola Bryant, she was obviously sort of probably new at this, and maybe I don't know how new she was to acting at the time, but I know some backstory on the character, and they wanted her to be American, and there was a lot of like back and forth on whether the actress was American. I think they were kind of trying to sort of, I don't know if they were trying to fool people or it was just part of a whole campaign that got out of hand.
So can I confess, after all these years, I was fooled.
Really?
I thought I'd gone until we watched Planet of Fire, and this may be another reason for the TARDIS Randomizer bringing us here, believing that Nicola Bryant was, if not American, then maybe sort of American adjacent, like Canadian.
And how quickly was that illusion shattered by the actual episode?
Yes, as soon as we start watching, I'm like, hang on, that's not an American accent, that's not a Canadian accent. That is a posh actor trying to do an American accent, which I think either goes to show that she got a lot better at the American accent as she goes on, or we may discover, if we get to the Colin Baker era, that I was just very... I did not really understand what American accents sounded like as a child growing up. Maybe I didn't watch enough American TV.
Yeah, I it's not just like her accent is all over the place, right? I mean, it's not just that. It's that even her Britishisms come out. She says to Howard at one point, "Don't let's argue."
Yes. Oh, yeah. And at one point, she pronounces the word glass.
Yes.
Instead of glass.
Yeah.
Glass.
So. It's like, why not? Like, I just don't get it, and I should probably research this. Like, why not just cast an American? Like, I don't.
It was weird that a lot of TV shows in Britain in the 80s and definitely in the 70s would use fake Americans. People would do fake American accents. I think one of the classic examples that nerds like us might remember is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They have Mark Wing Davey. I believe is a British actor, putting on a very, very American accent for Zaphod Beeblebrox.
Right. Man, it didn't even occur to me that he was American or, so alien. I haven't seen that in, my God, 3 decades or something like that. But
that was sort of par for the course, right? We like, maybe there were 1 or 2 American actors hanging around London in those days, but they got nowhere near the BBC. It's a lot different these days.
Yeah, exactly. I would imagine, it was a completely different era. I mean, the whole idea of Doctor Who even being a franchise at the time was new. They were clearly, and as we'll explore further, like they were still clearly making it on about $5 an episode. So, even as a young American actor trying to make it somewhere, I mean, if you're haven't made it in Hollywood, you're certainly not making money, but the potential for making money is, 1984, I guess it was.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was out in '84. It was probably filmed in '83, I imagine. But yes, I think there's something else about this first Perry scene that kind of gives us a clue as to why they didn't pay too much attention to the accent, which is the sheer amount of skin on display. In this story in general, I would say that was the other thing about the opening scene on San, was the shortness of the shorts being worn. It's just there was a period in the mid 80s where
you're talking
all
about the men now
shorts. Too. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then we get to Howard. Yeah, Turlough's practically naked for most of this episode. Howard, Perry's stepfather, is defiantly shirtless throughout this scene, to the point where I actually thought at first he was supposed to be a boyfriend, and was a little skeezed out when I discover he's the stepfather.
Yeah, exactly.
The evil stepfather.
I mean, I think honestly, I think it was probably more a lot of it for practical reasons. Like it was hot and they were on vacation, mostly kind of filming this. But yeah,
Perry
100%.
is definitely. I mean, John Nathan Turner, explicitly wanted Perry as a boost to the sex factor.
Yeah, they wanted some eye candy on the show.
Yes, which had been done before. That was yes, but also very 70s. Right? Yeah, this was the way that we got Leela. Was the idea of yes, for the blokes, for the soccer blokes watching TV at 5 p.m. on a Saturday, you want to show a bit of skin. But Perry sort of takes it to a new level with her bikini.
Yeah.
So pretty cheesecakey, but at least you get the beefcake as well. Like it's kind of equal opportunity this episode.
So I got to say, lots of attention's paid to Perry's accent and how potentially unconvincing it was. I got to say, Howard's is worse. But no one's talked about this guy who plays Howard. He is like not at all convincing as an American. So if
mercifully he's out pretty early on.
Yeah, if we're setting any kind of common standard, he even says like at some point, I think to the doctor after he shows up, like, "Your English Mary Rose" or something, like these things people just would never say.
Yes.
Anyway, I got to say, although there's a lot of skin, the doctor he takes off his cricket sweater, which makes sense, but he doesn't quite show the skin. Of course, why would he? But he has actually some kind of like nice clothes. I mean, not nice because it's like this was when everyone was wearing costumes in this, and so he had question marks all over everything. Just apparently, I guess, to show how enigmatic he was. Like he had question mark suspenders, question mark collar.
I love that idea that he would just go and advertise his enigmatic nature with the question mark shirts. I know a lot of fans dislike that JNT innovation. I kind of go back and forth on it. I liked it as a kid. I don't like it now.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth in that. I liked it as a kid. I didn't like it for a long time, and now I'm kind of it's kind of neat. And I also really liked his vest. It was a very nice vest. And generally, I just think I like the idea that, and I think they've done this more in the new series. Like he's changed his outfits. He's in a warm climate. He took off the jumper. He's rolling up his sleeves. It's like, yeah.
Well,
like
the very first time we see the Doctor, he's wearing his celery jacket.
Yeah.
And we should definitely institute a celery watch segment for every time we see celery whenever we land in the Davison era, because this was pretty damn wilted.
Agreed.
To say.
I think it's a count of one through the whole serial.
Yeah. We see it briefly at the beginning, and they're obviously like, well, he doesn't even need fresh celery for this. This is the BBC. We've got to keep costs at a minimum. So they give him a yellow piece of celery, practically wilting on his lapel.
Yeah. So if you're looking
and then he just takes it off.
If you were looking for vegetables on lapels in this serial, you were not happy. You were writing to the BBC by the end of episode 4 and complaining. Celery count on this one I think is 1.
And he goes to a vest, to like a sweater vest.
Yeah, and he only wears that for I think a little bit for the first episode.
Yeah,
but generally, like I did like the idea of like the Doctor's, he's not just like a superhero in one costume, and I like just the whole idea. Like Davison looks good in just a shirt and suspenders, and like this idea of the Time Lord rolling up his sleeves and getting some rescue on. I think it was palpable.
He didn't really go non-formal in those days, did he? Like
no, he was almost every
occasionally.
episode. Yeah, just the
Occasionally,
sweaters.
you'd see Tom Baker in shirt sleeves,
Hmm.
but it was always like a very ruffled shirt, very poety shirt.
So, also in this episode, we see the return of a companion that we haven't seen since a few episodes ago at this point. Uh,
King's Demons.
the King's Demons, yeah. That was like his only other appearance, really, and that is a chameleon.
Mm.
Which is really like K9, another robotic prop as companion, which was infamously like never worked, was not. Everyone hated apparently, including the cast, working with this robot. They actually contorted the script of this one so that they didn't have to bring the prop to Lanzarote.
Mm.
That's why he's actually in a different form through most of the series, through most of the serial.
Was
Uh,
he? Do you? Since you remember this Davison era so much better than I, did he sort of show up in the background of shots on the TARDIS in the in between
Never, not even mentioned.
serial? No.
No, not mentioned. Actually, you know what? Come to think about it, he might have been mentioned in Frontiers. We'd have to watch that again. But I mean, he was
So
not
we
at
have King's
all
Demons. He,
on
he
screen.
was he was a machine of the Master,
Right.
right? Or the Master had found him on this planet. The Doctor steals him at the end of King's Demons.
That's right.
And for the rest of the time, he's just like, oh, yeah, I just have this evil master machine hanging out in my TARDIS,
Yeah, and that was
plugged
some
into
time
the
ago. Actually, come
mainframe.
to think of it, I think I might have said earlier in the season, but it was actually the previous season at the King's Demons. It was towards the end of that season.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently it didn't work out. They were eager to get rid of him. This is, I mean, spoiler alert. This serial is Chameleon's last appearance and final appearance, and
Hashtag
it seems.
RIP Chameleon.
I will say, he goes out with a bang. He's the prop isn't in it for much, but the Chameleon is in it a lot,
Mm.
and they're
It even hinges on Chameleon,
100%.
the whole story.
So it's Peter Grimwade did Chameleon a solid on his send off. So Chameleon is having problems for whatever reason. He's screaming, and there's some weirdness going on, and so they finally like, oh yeah, we have Chameleon in whatever room we left him in. We have to make sure he's all right. He's not all right, and so when Turlo goes back to quote unquote program an alpha rhythm, I think it was. I don't know if I got that.
Was it alpha rhythm or algorithm? I just program an algorithm. He loves those things.
I don't know. I feel like alpha waves is a thing I've heard at some point on some
Mm.
sci-fi show, so that's why I thought it was alpha. But he does that and says so.
Sounds
Turlo.
more doctory.
So
Yeah.
not only have we seen, if you're a Doctor Who fan, you're like excited. Oh, Chameleon's here. Turlo gets some. We get echoes of Turlo's early time on the TARDIS when he gets a transmission. He says it's a Trion ship. We don't really know what Trion is at this point, but he's concerned. He tries to actually wreck the console a little bit to like turn off the transmission and sort of almost like he's sort of half deceiving the Doctor on like what he was
Yeah.
interpreting. So
He's-
it's like
he's-
you've got old Turlo back.
He's back to Mordred Undead Turlo, which I kind of carry a flame for Mordred Undead myself. I always
me
loved
too.
that serial. But I was thinking during these early scenes with Turlo, is this the unfriendliest the TARDIS has ever been? It's like, because the Doctor's sort of moping, they're obviously missing Tegan, which I think is mentioned once,
Right.
and they're just sort of kind of standing at the console at the start, not talking to each other. It's certainly the most introverted that the TARDIS has ever been, because they're just not chatty and they're not friendly, and they don't. There's no real love lost between these two. You get the sense, like if you were just parachuted into this episode and you'd never seen any Doctor Who before, you would wonder why the hell they were traveling together.
Agreed. Even though it's very notable that this is one of the only times where the TARDIS is being piloted by two dudes. Um,
Yeah.
And yeah, like you kind of, it kind of makes you question, which she also kind of questioned a little bit in Modern and Dead, like, what does the Doctor see in this guy?
Yeah.
Like, why are they
Why are you
buddies?
just traveling around with this public school boy? It just looks very, very sus, as the kids say.
Yeah. Although, like, Turlo, in fairness, has always he's clearly like an older adult.
Yes.
He's playing younger, but I mean, especially in this episode, he's okay. Yes, this is a man. Um, a man who occasionally wanders around in a Speedo, apparently. So,
And was sure to strip down to it before saving Perry's life.
yeah. So
Mm.
as the Doctor, exactly, and so as what happens is they go to the Earth to track down this signal. Um, they're looking for it. The Doctor and Turlo get separated. Turlo strips down to rescue Perry, who's stripped down.
Yeah,
Uh,
because she was trapped on the boat by Howard because he didn't want her to go off to Morocco with some friends she'd just met.
right.
So he's concerned for his stepdaughter's safety so much that he abandons her on a boat when she can't apparently swim.
Well, it's not that he's concerned about her safety. He's concerned that he's going to hear about it from his wife
Oh yeah.
that he didn't take care of her. So he just doesn't want to get yelled at. So he treats her terribly, which is all kind of a little icky. But there, she dives in the water in her bikini, puts her clothing and her belongings, including the device that apparently the Doctor and Turlo are tracking, into a plastic bag. And I always
Yes.
it's written fine. It's just, this is again one of the sort of Doctor Who production $5 an episode qualities. Like what went wrong on her swim, which was roughly like 50 feet from shore. The boat is apparently 50 feet from shore. If you look at the shot, and she starts to drown. I'm like, what is this? Like,
I'm presuming they didn't have enough money for the CGI, for the special effects of the mind ray that suddenly hit her, where she suddenly forgets how to swim.
Yeah, if you look at like swimming as maybe a skill continuum, right? With like Michael Phelps over here on number 10, like Perry is so past number 1. She's at like negative 200 in terms of her swimming.
Like she obviously thought she was ready for this. She bags up the platinum device and her clothes for some aplomb. Can we just talk about this device, because this is where they sort of the skin-filled nature of this episode goes over the top, and
Yes.
this was noted by reviewers at the time. The alien device that Howard and she have found it looks exactly like a penis. I mean, not even any question. Like, it is literally just they've cast a platinum dildo.
The Tryons are into their sex toys, apparently.
And oh my goodness! And it's one of those things where you look at this and you're like, this, we were so innocent back then that this could go out. And nobody would crack a smile. I'm sure many a smile was cracked, but it just like, this was okay for kids.
Yeah, it was just like, what were they thinking? I mean, one end, they're both bulbous ends of this thick rod, and one is like significantly more bulbous than the other. You're just like, your jaw drops, and this isn't really a defense. I would just say it's as a kid, it didn't occur to me, but like. Plus a few years, you're just like, oh man.
Sometimes a platinum device from another planet is just a platinum device from another planet, as Freud said.
Exactly. Anyway, so all this sort of comes together at the TARDIS. Perry gets tossed into one of the rooms. Turlo puts her in a bed.
Is this the first time? Yeah, I know. It's getting creepier. Like, they're barely dressed and he's putting her in bed with the platinum penis. And examining it. Like, it just gets worse and worse.
In any other show, there would be some misunderstanding about what they were doing in there, and perhaps some innuendo. Here it's just played completely straight.
It is, and my first question, already getting back to the childhood mindset, it was like, is this the first time that we've seen a bedroom on the TARDIS?
It is not. I do remember shortly after Turlo came on board, actually. Obviously, this is probably the same set or whatever they were doing to recreate that. When they were actually is one of the very only times they showed someone getting set up, given a room in the TARDIS, and so Turlo gets Adric's room, and there's a bit of back and forth. And this is again one of the few times at this point where the TARDIS, this is in Terminus, and they're kind of invaded, and there's a lot of interior TARDIS stuff, on par with, say, the Doctor's wife. So it's not the first time we've seen a bedroom, but this is a sort of very notable era for like showing a little bit more of TARDIS life than we were sort of in previous eras.
Oh yeah, that was Davison all over, right? The Zero Room,
right?
All this stuff. We see a lot more of the inner life of the TARDIS that's lacking in other eras.
So everything kind of comes together because of Perry's problem. She not a problem. She has this dream that influences what Chameleon looks like. So she has a dream about Howard. So because Chameleon ostensibly is controlled by mind waves or mind, feelings and thoughts, he takes the form of Howard.
Right. And she's mercifully dreaming about Howard in a suit.
And you really have to, what I just said there about Chameleon. I mean, it sort of makes sense, but as a viewer, this show working is really dependent on you kind of coming halfway with how Chameleon works. Because you kind of have to make it up on your own. Like, okay, we know he's controlled by mind stuff. In the next scene when he's posing as Howard, he says, "Doctor, we meet again." I mean, if you think about it, like, how does he know he met the Doctor? Well, he must be feeding off either the Doctor's thoughts or as a chameleon, as a you think this robot that needs to fool people is programmed with the absolute best body language interpretation there could possibly be. So when he walks out into the room, whatever the Doctor does, he immediately perceives the Doctor's met this guy. So he's like, "Oh, the Doctor, we meet again."
So weird. Yeah, a lot of headcanon required for this story.
A lot, but somehow it works. Because we're really more into like trying to figure out, does the Doctor even know that's Chameleon? No, he clearly doesn't. And I'll kind of say, no one questions that Howard suddenly put on like a suit for whatever. I guess he was going out, clubbing later. Something from his closet. It would have been funny to sort of have Perry, and maybe this is just me being a continuity nerd, but like, yeah, well, where were you keeping that suit in your luggage, Howard? Like, I don't remember you packing that.
That's what they would do these days, just throw in a line, just explain it.
So then they chase the signal from the very rather rude-looking prop, and they end up on Sarn. And so the Doctor and Turlough head out, and we come to the cliffhanger of episode 1, which I actually found really effective, where Chameleon just starts saying creepy things as Howard. And Perry isn't well served by this scene because she kind of becomes, the screaming companion. I'm scared and I'm going to scream because I don't know what to do. As Chameleon transforms, or Howard rather, transforms into the Master. And he delivers that classic line right before the credits, which is, "I am the Master, and you will obey me." And I think, as it's a great line, obviously, it's a classic line. Ainley, I think he says it only a couple of times. I think this might be one of the last times he actually says that exact line.
Anthony Ainley, such a mainstay of my childhood, and this was supposed to be his last Doctor Who story.
Yeah, apparently his contract was up. Which explains a lot of the ending, which we'll get to. But it also
explains why they kind of phoned the Master in a lot of ways in this story, I feel, for reasons we'll get to. But right away we see that is probably the worst mustache that they've ever given the Master when he appears in the suit in the TARDIS.
Yeah, I think we might disagree on whether the Master's effective or not in this one, but I do agree that this is, his look in this one is unfortunately not polished.
He does look creepy in a suit. He's very Roger Delgado-ish in a lot of scenes. Apparently there were scenes that he recorded where he did not go OTT on the dialogue, but was then instructed to by a director. So it's a shame that we don't get to see a more muted performance, because my God, he chews the scenery from his very first appearance.
Yeah, and that was an Ainley Master thing, and you either like that or you don't. I happen to like it. I thought the ending here was really, really good, because and I remember at the time, I mean, it's really hard to remember the first time I watched it, but I remember not knowing what was up and not knowing
Mm.
obviously the masters. And it is a surprise. It's like, oh, wow. And this is cool. This episode was already kind of interesting on some levels, was suddenly taken to another level. And then you just cut to credits and it's just like, oh, wow. I really want to cut to the next one. Now, this actually isn't the episode that I was referring to earlier, unlike the one that really
Oh,
got me excited about
interesting.
wanted to see the next episode. But I thought it was a really good cliffhanger, and we're cutting to episode 2.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
So I got to say, episode 2 starts off. Obviously it gives you the recap. One thing I gotta say, we haven't talked about it at all because we only talked a little bit about the Sarns at the beginning. The guy who plays Timonov is fantastic. Like, he is so good. Like, he's this obviously super religious zealot who yet somehow can waver from sort of this intense dogmatic belief system, but also sort of be a gentle and sort of kind and understanding, on sort of the other side. Like, he really sort of knows how to play this religious father figure so well, and he has so many great lines.
So this is Peter Wingard, and I don't know if you knew this, but he was famous in the UK for playing a character called Jason King, which is a detective series in the UK, and Jason King has been credited with inspiring Austin Powers. And he's very much, if you look at pictures of him online, he's got the open shirt, he's got the hairy chest, he's got the metal dangling over the chest, he's got the sideburns and the mustache. So to see him playing this sort of buttoned up religious zealot, like something out of Lawrence of Arabia, is very bizarre, given that he's the Austin Powers in British TV. So,
yeah,
he gives a great performance.
Even though the Sarns don't wear laces, it looks like he's very straight laced. Yeah, no, it's a great performance. You hang off everything he's going to say. He clearly has so much say in what his people think and do, and he throughout plays his role in sort of interesting ways. There's a point where he yells like. So the chosen one, Malcolm, who we later learn is Turlough's brother, says something like the heretics they don't really cause any harm, or they mean no harm, and Timonov sort of intensely comes back at him with we're now on this brink of ruin because we've angered Logar. No harm, he screams at him. It's honestly like it really. I'm glad this scene happens early because. It makes, even though there's obviously a destructive component to what Timonov's saying and the whole ideology he represents, but it makes him understandable. It's not really sympathetic, but you get it. You get who this guy is, where he's coming from, as misguided as that may be.
Right.
Very, very good.
He's the religious zealot. He plays it to a T, and you sort of instantly get the idea of a dying, crumbling religion that even he's not happy with the fact that his whole culture appears to be dying, and the religion is the only thing that he can cling to. So yeah, it's actually a performance with some depth.
So back in the TARDIS, Perry is like trying to figure out how to deal with this robot person, which she quickly learns is a robot because as she deals with the master version of Chameleon, she tries to kick him, and she hurts her foot. Clearly kicking that sort of hard metal of Chameleon's leg. And but because of that, because he's so sort of casually cruel to her and starts hurting her shoulder, like apparently she starts using like that, so this is the equivalent of her, like her anguish starts to interfere with the control. And so she can sort of somehow push it hard enough. I mean, again, you really got to do the headcanon here, right? The Chameleon changes back to Howard and then back to his old self for a little bit. And so this starts sort of the plot device of like TARDIS components, which for whatever reason, John Nathan Turner really loved to pull out devices, parts of the TARDIS. He does this I think 3 or 4 times in the Davison era. like pieces of the TARDIS get taken out, hidden, traded. And the TARDIS is really like treated as like, kind of an everyday machine, a piece of engineering here more than any other era. And so, Perry gets like the comparator, I think it's called, and runs off.
I'm so glad you're keeping track of what was actually happening with TARDIS components, because I was lost. I have to say, I would often say that many times in my childhood, I would just watch a Doctor Who serial for the as a series of disjointed images, and kind of blame myself for not really understanding the story or keeping up with the story. Planet of Fire is the kind of serial where I'm like, no, it was actually just a terribly explained story with MacGuffins up the wazoo, and so many MacGuffins, so many TARDIS bits, and and the platinum penis, which sort of gets lost and forgotten at some point. Like everyone's running with MacGuffins everywhere. The volcanic gas becomes a MacGuffin. It just I'm amazed that this stuff passed muster at the time. And that we all put up with it. I think it is partly because a lot of people did just sort of watch Doctor Who as a series of disconnected images that kind of look nice, and performances that were kind of cool.
And it does look nice, and the performances are cool. It's just, it's one of those, like, it's funny that John Nathan Turner, as famously said, he thought the sonic screwdriver was a crutch, right? That this, as a plot device. Mm. And so he got rid of it and sort of challenged his writers to sort of do better. But I got to say, if there's a crutch plot device in the Davison era, I think it's this sort of pull one circuit out of the TARDIS, or any TARDIS, and it doesn't work, and then we got to run after it or trade it or do whatever. I mean, it happens in Time Flight. It happens even in, I think, Arc of Infinity. It certainly happens here.
Are they pulling bits out of the TARDIS console in all of these instances?
Yeah,
is it just that the Doctor, he didn't have great TARDIS console security?
Well, it's also like there's technobabble, like it's either the temporal limiter or the temporal stabilizer or the comparator or whatever it is. But, if you think about it, like, well, dude, if your TARDIS is 100% dependent on this one thing and you'll be stranded otherwise, like, maybe have a few of those lying around, like... the fact that, like, it's just so easily disabled, I don't know, like, it's weird. And
it would be so good if in one of these episodes the Doctor just called in an IT guy who, like, there's some IT guy buried away in the TARDIS somewhere. It only comes at moments like this. Yeah, I lost my comparator.
Well, we can bypass that. Hold on. I've got the Cybermen online too, so I'll get right back to you. Okay, so Perry's running off with the comparator. The Master, or rather Chameleon, is running after her. We can see right away, because they cut to him, that this is obviously not the Master. We know it's not, but we know the Master is somewhere and is controlling Chameleon through some kind of weird headdress. He looks like he's in a Borg hair salon with all the green lights.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he's doing that. Turlough's getting slowly more intense. He's sort of slowly explaining to the doctor that, there's people from Tryon here because of these triangle thingies we saw on the Rude prop. We see that same triangle design on some pillars or whatever.
And the Doctor has one line around here that's like, "Oh yeah, you never really told me about your backstory."
Which is like, why didn't you ask, dude? I mean, like, really? Like,
just remind us all that you've been carrying this unknown child across the universe and not really been very curious about him.
Yeah, it's like, they've clearly got to get some better background checks to join the TARDIS crew. But
yeah, also security.
Yeah, so they find some of the people disarmed. So they, the Doctor and Turlough end up hooking up with Amiand and sort of the heretics, actually. And lo and behold, a man of science comes and tells them things that make sense. They believe him, which is to say that the planet is going to be destroyed. This volcano is going to destroy the whole planet. So it's apparently some kind of super volcano. This is one of those
ready
things,
to blow.
The Doctor, this isn't really a complaint. I'm just sort of, to look at Doctor Who and all sci-fi does this to some extent, making like a whole planet represented by a very small location in one story.
Hmm.
Apparently, these are the only people on the planet in this area, around this volcano. For some reason, they're all around the volcano. It's all very iconic, right? It's all very like, this is representative of something that may not hold up if you look at it under any scrutiny as a sort of a planetary civilization.
Right. You never
Um,
see more than like 10 people in one shot, so you
yeah,
just infer the rest of
and
the
and
civilization.
you don't see anything other than I think only one. There's a couple of sets, but the only set you actually see of like Sarn people living somewhere is in the first episode, and it's sort of clearly like some posh hotel in Lanzarote, some lobby or cloisters of it, and that you never see it again. You never see like normal Sarns living their normal Sarn lives, going to Sarn church and going to the Sarn
Yeah.
supermarket. It's
There's one bit where Timonov has to go up to a hill and look through a telescope, and it's just
yeah,
it's like a crappy 80s telescope stuck on a hill.
yeah. Speaking of convenient telescopes, Perry checks one out, sees the Doctor and Turlo in the distance, I believe, and then tries to go after them. They don't hear her. The Master keeps going after her. So, and Perry's quite, she's getting better, honestly, by the episode
Mm.
because she sort of thinks on her feet. She has the comparator. The Master catches up with her. She threatens to destroy the comparator. The Master visibly gets worried. It's a good little scene between them because, and it's actually quite, I think, delightful for the viewer that this sort of everyday girl, and this is a Doctor Who companion quality, is continually confounding this, formidable Time Lord, one of the Doctor's greatest enemies, because
Mm.
she's just standing up for herself and thinking on her feet,
Is,
which is quite good.
is this where we get the line "Purple Gillian Brown" and I can shout just as loud as you
That
can?
is it. Yeah,
That's probably her best line in this entire serial.
her response to "I am the master." It's like, so what?
Yeah,
uh,
I've got a cooler name.
Exactly, and she does that a few more times, and they're all very effective. It's quite good. So she convinces him, not him, convinces Chameleon to sort of try to resist the Master for a little bit, just giving her enough time to get away. So then the Master has to sort of change tacks, right? He focuses less on Perry and more on what he's here to do, and which we don't really know yet. But he goes and makes contact with the Sarns, and comes in as their outsider. Apparently, they're a religion. They have some kind of savior myth in addition to the god
Hmm.
Logar, and the savior is supposed to come, and it's the outsider. And at first, it looks like they might think it's the Doctor because they see the TARDIS and they see the flashing light or whatever in the distance with the telescope.
Yeah,
But then the Master comes in
yeah.
and swoops that identity right away.
There was some line that sort of gets buried about how the blue box was something that was foretold, or the blue box has appeared many times.
Right. Which is interesting, and it's
Which,
like it's convenient, obviously, for the writing, but it also sets up a little backstory potentially that this might not be the first time the Doctor's been here, or maybe he visits in the future.
right? So there's another piece of headcanon because I don't think that ever gets mentioned again.
No, and I don't think it's ever mentioned again in Doctor Who. Like that's certainly an opportunity for someone to write a story. I don't know if anyone's really rushing to do more things on Sarn. Again, it's like,
You hear that, Chris Chibnall? We need Jodie to go to Sarn
I mean, yeah, if they're bringing
so that
back
this.
the brain of Morbius, you might as well. But I really like how this episode ends. Again, another good cliffhanger because it really underscores the Master's cruelty. I think it's like showing evil people be evil, and again, yeah, certainly it's a style question on whether you like Anthony Ainley or not. But him to go, he basically says he uses the Doctor's greatest weakness, which is the death of innocence. Like he says, burn these people unless the Doctor tells me where the girl is. And the Doctor, at one point, he's almost begging with the Master, like, I don't know where the girl is. I don't have the comparator. You have to believe me. And he's like, oh, but I do believe you. And burn them all. So that's a good final sort of end to the episode. it's a cliffhanger. We know it's not gonna, it's Doctor Who.
So was this it? Was this your favorite cliffhanger?
It was not. So we're down to one, and you know what it is now. But it's a good moment for the Master, I think. And so, boom, cut to credits. And then episode 3 begins, and then, again, Doctor Who, $5 an episode. The set is probably smaller than my studio apartment in Harlem from 20 years ago. But they sure take a long time to burn those heretics. Like, you think it would just be pretty easy to just kind of push real hard, and 2 seconds later they'd all just fall in the mountain, and then the burn room.
The flames. The flames in this serial in general are pretty paltry, so I can actually believe it.
Yeah,
I like the idea of this dying civilization. They just they haven't paid their gas bill in a while, and so you don't really get the oomph you need to burn these heretics.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens is Malcolm comes in. He tells him to stop, and this creates an interesting sort of problem because for the Master, because he doesn't. He's been winging it. He doesn't really know like what the culture is here, and he doesn't know who this guy is. And the Doctor leaps. The Doctor pounces. Right? Is like, now I can turn the tables on you. You don't understand these folks. How can you possibly be the outsider? This is the bad guy, and they seem to be slowly getting convinced of that over the next few minutes.
This is hipster Doctor at his finest. He's like, I'm learning all about the local culture, and you're just a tourist. I like the idea of the Doctor using his desire for cultural knowledge as a weapon against the Master in this instance, saying how could he be the outsider? He doesn't even know. He couldn't identify Logar in a lineup.
Exactly.
Which actually becomes an issue at this point. Is this where we get the Doctor going back to the TARDIS and creating Logar? Or is that...
Well, first, that's a little later.
Kind of, yeah.
What happens is Malcolm tries to insist that there be no burning, but he gets shot by actually one of his own palace guards, and that the weapon is actually a beam weapon, which is never really explained all that much, because then this is where it might start occurring to you, like, wait a minute, this is a primitive culture. Clearly, there have beam weapons, and there's certain machinery and stuff that's seen here and there. Mm-hmm. So they never make a lot of it. I mean, you obviously find that it's a civilization that's essentially gone backwards, and that there has been some alien intervention from Turlough's people, but it's not really played up, and there's a lot they're playing up. So that happens. They're going to continue the burning. What happens is Perry comes in again, and tries to use her control over Camille. Oh no, actually Perry doesn't come in at that point. What happens is the Doctor tries to change it up. So sorry, I misremembered there. The Doctor begins his relentless psychic attack on Chameleon, and it's quite good. The music's good. His lines are good. He's silver puppet jumping on a string cut, and like these kinds of like really kind of like cutting, if you will, like lines, and the back as the Master kind of jerks around, and then you get that glowy effect on him. And the big problem is that even though the Doctor's doing great and he's going to assert control Chameleon shortly, it plays completely into the hands of his opponents, which is that, he's just made the Master look like he's magical. And he's the outsider. Yep. So, the Master uses that. He uses a few seconds advantage to make sure everyone's put in the cave, even though the fire's out. The fire went out, apparently, because Turlough turned it off, because again, that's the machinery we're talking about. And he reverts right back into the Master. And Perry gives it a go. A little bit later, but now he's apparently so strong, Perry can't affect him. Which again, this is all very arbitrary. It's only serving the needs of the script. But on some kind of headcanon level, it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, the Master's been apparently slowly like using his control over Chameleon. It's getting more stronger, more familiar. Maybe his signal's gotten boosted. I don't know, but it's like he apparently put a Wi-Fi extender somewhere. And
he's getting closer now because he's warped in at this stage, right? With the He's brought his TARDIS in.
Yeah, exactly. So the master's like stone TARDIS is now in the ruin, sort of right beside the doctor's, and he's clearly in there somewhere, though he hasn't come out for reasons which become clear at the end of the episode. So Perry can't affect it, but what happens is again we get more we get more Master and Perry. Honestly, Perry spends way more time with the Master in this serial than she does with the Doctor.
Really?
And it works. It actually kind of works. It works in that, like, I think, as I said earlier, from a companion enemy standpoint, but also, like, I think Anthony Haley and Nicola Bryant, is sort of a comedy duo.
Yeah. He's sort of grabbing her, like, bring the girl.
Yeah.
Even when he doesn't need her for comparative purposes. It's very much a, mustache twirling villain grabs the girl so he can tie her to the railroad track.
He really grabs her, and he he's I don't know, he's a real jerk to her. Like, he just grabs her by the arm, he twists her arm like physically to get her to shut up. Like, at moments, like it's really it's.
There are definitely moments where I'm like, dude, you catch more flies with honey. Come on, just be a little nicer to her. Maybe she will agree to obey you as a master. Come on, give her a chance.
So they get the Sarns to dig out his TARDIS, and it's so clearly like a styrofoam. Like, it's so funny how they all just kind of push it up, and it's just kind of like moving, like, don't let it shake too much. This is supposed to be super heavy. And so they rate it up, and so there's the classic line of like, the Master can't resist, even as Chameleon, turning to the Starns just as like they're asking, where are the gifts you promised? He's a gullible idiot.
I know, yeah. It's one last parting shot out of the door. That was strategically done.
Yeah, so he does that, and there's all the Doctor is freed at some point. Turlo comes and gets him, and then there's a little more on the TARDIS components, because the Master takes his TARDIS into the heart of the mountain. The Doctor wants to follow him, but he can't. He pulls out a drawer and it says, "Oh wow, another one of my TARDIS components has been removed." It's not the one earlier. It's not the comparator. It's like the temporal stabilizer or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess there's a bunch
at
of
this point.
One and done.
The IT guy's going to fine him, I'm sure, like $100 for the first missing component.
Yeah. So they kind of have to figure out what they're doing next. And the Doctor, at this point, there's a point where the Doctor really like comes at Turlo, which was interesting. For all of his neglect for all the previous episodes and not really paying attention to Turlo or what his motives are, where he's from, he finally does. He finally asks him, "What can you tell me what this is?" And you better not be keeping anything from me that could help me save these people or whatever. And it's like,
if you're hiding anything from me that could help the Master, our friendship's at an end, which is a very harsh thing for the Doctor to say.
But like, given his history, kind of totally justified.
Yeah.
So it's a good little moment between the two, and it's like, it's good that they sort of have this dip in their relationship to sort of end on an even higher note towards the end of the next one. But we're coming up here to the end of the third episode, and this is my favorite cliffhanger of the whole series. Of this serial, not the entire series.
Best cliffhanger, Doctor Who.
Best cliffhanger ever, man. Planet of Fire. It should be number 1 on your list.
Tiny Master in a box.
Tiny Master in a box. It's so good. And again, it's preceded by a lot of good back and forth between Ainley and Bryant, and then Perry and the Master. He's sort of showing her how evil he is all the time. He actually pulls out his tissue compression eliminator and like, oh, look, I can turn these suits into little suits. Be scared of me. And
the tissue compression.
When they're in the TARDIS, he lets her know, like, he moves a box, and for whatever reason, she intuits it's his control box, even though I don't see why that's at all intuitable by just having a box. Maybe he just has some Amazon shipments he needs to like open.
It's a giant black box. It perfectly matches the decor. I'd forgotten how badass the Master's TARDIS was.
It is so
the
much
all
better,
black.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
Oh,
works
how
somehow.
could you not? How could the Doctor not see that and go goth himself? Like, I'm going to paint my bedroom wall completely black after seeing this. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
the TARDIS but black is just, it's brilliant. Brilliant. I love it. Miss it.
Yep. Uh, I was gonna send some blue is the new black kind of joke, but I don't know
Black
if
is
that
the
makes
new
a lot of
blue.
sense. Okay, so like, and then
Black
you
is the
know,
new bright white.
so
Way too white.
yeah, so Perry has a good line right at the end where she's like, "Well, I may have a puny mind, but you don't have to be Albert Einstein to find the off switch." She opens the lid of the box, and it is Tiny Master, you little Master in the box, and he just with a complete straight face tells her, "You escape from my slave, but you'll obey me or die." And
Yes.
it's just like
Which I think would have been much improved if he'd recorded the line with helium.
that would have been. I would love to like see a YouTube dub of that. We should do that. If you're listening out there, please do a YouTube dub of that if that doesn't exist. But it's so good, and honestly, this is it. This is the cliffhanger that got me going. Like, okay, I really want to see what happens next because even though I knew it was coming, it's like what does Perry do? Like the change, the sheer shock of like, okay, I'm gonna like just see what this is, and it's like the guy. It's this like what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Like what? It's just such a
I
nutty
really,
thing.
I wanted her to turn to the camera and sort of, clamp her hands over her face and go, "Honey, I shrunk the master." It's like something turns it into a 50s sitcom style, just
Yeah, I think
wrong.
I
I
say
mean,
it's a whole nother level we're on here. It's like you're getting into like yeah, your sitcom farce level stuff, but yet it's taken completely seriously, and that's to Doctor Who's credit. That's what it does with this stuff. And so we begin episode 4, and for whatever reason, her choice is to knock over the box. Um, she kicks, even though it's like, which is I kind of understandable on some level. It's almost like that same level of disgust when you see a big bug where you didn't expect to see one, and you just kind of like you immediately recoil. You might try to swat it or shove it away or get it to go away. It's like that level of disgust.
obviously,
Like
what she needed was a mason jar and a piece of paper.
right, right,
You just kind of coax the master onto the paper, stick the mason jar, throw it out.
and take him back to Gallifrey and
Yeah.
let him wander off.
Do not flush him down the drain. Always a bad idea.
Um, so what happens with the the box getting knocked down is that Chameleon goes down because now his control is completely lost, which makes some kind of sense. Um, so episode 4, everything's coming together. I got to say, we cut a little bit to the Doctor at some point. He's talking to Amiand, and I got to say, Peter Davison was the champ of technobabble. Like
Yes.
he would rattle
Total
off
straight face.
things about whether it's TARDIS components, warp ellipses. What I think he streams off a few sentences of technobabble about what the Sarns were doing here and the new mesmeton gas and whatever else. To me, I remember as a kid watching it, 100% convincing. I wanted to know what all this stuff was. It didn't occur to me it was just sort of nonsense some writer threw down on a page because blah blah blah. You got to do it. Um,
So you may know this, that Peter Davis's big role before being the Doctor was in a British series called All Creatures Great and Small, in which he plays a vet
yes, I
called
did know
Tristan. And the one thing, All Creatures Great and Small was another sort of show that I would half watch because my parents were watching it, where it was a series of disconnected images, but he would just spew vet babble throughout that show, right? That it just sort of sounded like noise in your ear, like Charlie Brown's teacher talking, but he would say it convincingly, and I'm convinced that it was the perfect lead-in to playing the Doctor, because he just he took vet babble and replaced it with techno babble. It's like the same level of convincing
Huh.
in both instances. So
It makes a lot of sense.
he absolutely, there's one point where he talks about something's been computerized. I'm like, oh,
Right.
that
That's a little weak.
that technobabble did not age well. It did not age well. But other than that, yeah, he totally sells it.
He does. Also, when he, I forget if it's right around this point or later, but he's having a good chat with Amiand about who the Sarns are, what's their plight at this point, and it makes me think, Amiand would have been a good companion. I wouldn't mind him, just like he doesn't have a lot going on after with his people, although he's implied to be the new leader. That's what the Doctor says he should be. But I kind of regret like he didn't come on board the TARDIS.
He's one of those, but he got a trip in the TARDIS, right? He accompanies the Doctor at some point.
Yeah. So what happens is they take the TARDIS. No, they don't. They have to go. They don't take the TARDIS. It's later. Actually, I'm not sure if he actually does take a ride in the TARDIS because they can't take the TARDIS to the mountain because the temporal stabilizer's been removed. They actually have to walk it, so they hike it all the way over. Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. And what they end up doing is taking the Amiand has to walk back. He's the one guy who can walk back because they're cut off from leaving the mountain again from this sort of control room within the volcano because of the flames, because of the lava. And there's or rather the stock footage of the lava. So
great stock footage, by the way.
It was pretty good. Definitely, I think I've seen that in a few nature documentaries.
Yeah. I was expecting to hear David Attenborough's voice at that point, but no, that would be what you'd normally expect.
He has to give he pulls out the Master's temporal stabilizer when they go into the Master's TARDIS after they've arrived in the control room, and Amiand has to take it back. So what's happened before then is Perry has tried to swat the Master. He actually, I believe, takes off her shoe at one point. And they have a great, again, it's another great Master Perry exchange where he's like, help me and I'll spare your life. And she's like, spare my life? Come on out here and say that. Because he's hiding in the console.
I could definitely see a spin-off show for Perry and the Tiny Master.
Perry and Tiny Master. Oh, man. Whatever it is, it'd be better than K9 and Company. I guarantee you that. So she gets out of the TARDIS because the Master opens the door. For whatever reason, that means she has to go. So she leaves the TARDIS of her own accord after the door opens, meets up with the Doctor and Amiand. They go back in to find the Master trying to regain control of Chameleon because he's crawled out of the console and back into the control box. So they right the control box right side up, and then you have this conversation between the three of them on the top half of the screen and the Master on the bottom. And again, this is not an effect that ages well at all. Honestly, even for the technology at the time and the budget they had, it baffles me why they did some kind of handheld camera thing with shake for the three people, for the shot with the three of them. It's so shaky. You're just like, you're just putting your head, you're just doing the face palm, and you're just like, guys, really, you couldn't have put the camera on a table?
It doesn't even look like they're looking directly at the Master in that scene. It's really, really bad special effects.
Yeah, it's not like there were good special effects are rampant on TV, but it just so on another level of I don't care. It was just really, really unfortunate. That said, the conversation's pretty good, although it doesn't really make a lot of sense why the Master was trying to make the tissue compression eliminator even deadlier. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe a wide area effect. 100%
more tissue compression.
But they have a little back and forth.
Even wider.
And Chameleon comes in and apparently whatever the Master did before they walked in was enough to get the Chameleon back. He coaxes them out of the TARDIS so that he can execute on the final plan, which is to restore Tiny Master into full-size Master and potentially even more powerful master towards the end of the episode. So before then, Amion walks out. He does his little Logar thing because he puts on the thermal suit and has his moment where he impresses Timonov and everyone else that he was, he's Logar for a second, but he quickly, rather than bossing them around, actually just takes off the mask and is like, hey, no, just me, just Amion. And
it's so weird that they had a religion built around a god who was so clearly a guy in a thermal suit.
Yeah, you got to think like some of these religions where, the person's just a guy. It's like, well, maybe that was just a guy. I'm just saying,
It's a guy in a silver suit.
And thankfully they sort of ended on a sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily religion positive note, but the idea that, when he is deceived, Timonov says, you don't understand. Like, it doesn't shake his faith. He just sort of says the sort of obvious sort of catch-all response of like Logar is everywhere. That's kind of the point, which is like,
yeah,
fair enough. And it kind of ends tragically for Timonov because the strong implication is that he doesn't go. That he, even though Amion tries to convince him and literally reaches out his hand, like, please come with me and let's be saved by this Trion ship that Turlo has conveniently gotten here in 5 minutes. He doesn't do it. He turns away. And I found that to be strangely affecting. I strangely cared about Timonov and what he thought and what his ending was.
I was sure we were going to get a scene of him, amidst the wreckage with maybe a beam falling in front of him and a panicked look at his face, just to remind us that he was still there. But instead they blow up the planet without him. And it's one of those classic, Davison blowing up the planet or the base or the ship. Like, it seems this was happening a lot in the Davison era, that you'd always have a scene where they blew up the models of the set right at the end.
100%, yeah. And it's like the set being, again, one room smaller than a studio apartment with like a few plants and some stucco and drywall that's painted to look like rocks. And so it kind of it gets kind of wrecked, but you're not really impressed by either the set or the wreckage. But they feel obligated to do it. Certainly the control center gets wrecked later, but that's after the big scene. Okay, so in the big scene, obviously, the Doctor and Perry, and finally they get to spend at least a little time on screen together, apart from the very brief bit in episode 1. So the Doctor and Perry are quite effective. At least they wrote some good Dr. Perry companion stuff. She asks for some explanation of what he's doing. He gets her to actively help in the plot to first disable Chameleon and then deal with the Master. So the Chameleon reaches a tragic end, and it's this whole couple of scenes, and we should really sort of take it apart a bit. Like Davison goes dark, and Chameleon, they set something up so that when he materializes the Master's TARDIS in the flame, he walks out. They screw up his brain, his mechanical brain. He falls down, turns back into the prop. Briefly, he and the Doctor have some sort of wistful words. He says he's sorry, and Chameleon begs him to destroy him, ostensibly because he realizes how easily controlled he is and how easily he can become an agent of evil. The Doctor
doesn't have any qualms about doing so, any compunction, it seems. He just sort of got a bit of a sad look on his face, but he does it. And it's like there's no have I the right here. It's like, yeah, okay, you wanna kill yourself, sure.
Which is,
there you go.
I don't want to unpack it too much, but it is like they did say explicitly in the King's Demons, he does have a mind of his own. He is a person. And I think that's sort of evident in the performance and how they wrote him here. It's just there's something about him that he can't be, he's too easily controlled. And couldn't you upgrade his programming somehow? Couldn't you put in firewalls, you know what I mean? Like, or sort of basic encryption maybe? I mean, these kind of ideas. I mean, it's all a bit, hindsight 2020 or whatever, and certainly there were pragmatic reasons to get rid of the prop. But I mean, to have him go there and destroy this
Oh my
sentient
God.
thing.
Could you imagine though if a chameleon had still been alive in Caves of Androzani? I don't think we'd be talking about it as a classic.
No,
we talk about that,
no, we
that
definitely wouldn't.
great serial that was slightly ruined by
It's
this.
just a, but if you're going to write him out, I'm not necessarily even saying this is the wrong choice, or it's certainly dramatic. There's moments, but it does like you. I think you have to deal with it, right? And I think they never really dealt with this that well, unless. Well, there's things to pick apart you could in further episodes, but it's a bit of a stretch. But even that isn't the most dramatic thing that happens, right? So, like, shortly after that, Perry goes into the TARDIS, and then the Master comes out. The Mesmeton gas, the blue flame, surrounds him, and he grows to full-size Master, which is to say regular-size Master. And he starts ranting about how evil he is and how he's going to kill the Doctor. And the Doctor has ostensibly set it up so that the gas doesn't last and that the flames, the real flames, the burning flames, return. And as soon as that happens, the Master, for whatever reason, he's sort of trapped there. They never really explain that he can't just walk out. But he starts commanding, begging the Doctor to turn it off, to basically turn off the flames. And the Doctor just stands there. And he just looks at him. And then after a little bit, the Master just starts screaming about how he's going to get revenge, but then he just burns to a crisp. And honestly, like, it's so clear that that's what they intended. Like, from the effect, he doesn't shrink again. He doesn't really it's not a mystery what happens to him. He just burns into nothingness.
Davison has some good acting here, as good as he can get without having any dialogue whatsoever.
Yeah, agreed.
It's just,
it's definitely a moment, and I'm really glad they went subtle with the music as well. It was very kind of eerie, but it was also, like these somber tones that you barely even notice, and you kind of as much as there's no dialogue, you kind of get it.
Yeah, clearly the Doctor is ready for the Master to die. And he's just going to sort of stand there through inaction, but it is, let him die through inaction. But he's haunted by it. He's troubled by it. And then the Master says the line that has people debating for years. How could you do this? What is it exactly? How could you do this to your own?
To your
own. ...
And he just doesn't finish the sentence. He just screams after that because apparently the pain's gotten too much.
This is it. Won't you even show mercy to your own ... And I actually brought this up with Stephen Moffat at Comic-Con one time. I can't remember why we were talking about. Yes, this very line.
Yeah.
Which is why this is another wonderful reason that the randomizer has brought us here. Because I now get to name drop with the Stephen Moffat story. We were interviewing about the season after Missy's first appearance, and we were talking about the Master for some reason, and I happened to mention, isn't there a thing somewhere that where he's like, hints that he's his brother or related in some way, and Moffat was able to say, that thing at the end of Planet of Fire, won't you even show mercy to your own ... And then his first thing is, well, that could also apply to your own valet or your own butler. That was, which is fair. Maybe he was saying that. Who knows? That's my brief story about that line and its essential ambiguity.
Yeah, I always like. I think I initially thought that should have been. There's more to that line. You could have, I think I ultimately interpreted it as, your own kind and your own kind of, he almost consciously stops it. Won't you show mercy to your own, and sort of saying it stylistically in a way that, so that you don't even have to say the word kind. I think that's kind of where I went with it in my head. But
I very much remember at the time thinking, they're clearly brothers.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe looking back on it now, maybe I was influenced by the fact that Turlo finds his own brother in this very episode, but also that was just sort of where sci-fi fantasy was at the time, right? Because we were
It's all family.
83, 84. We were still, in the afterglow of Return of the Jedi had not yet faded.
Sure.
Um,
I'm your
you
father.
know, random familial connections were everywhere at the time. So maybe that's what influenced this natural assumption on the part of a lot of people watching this episode that they were somehow related.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know
It's
we're supposed to talk about this episode, but this episode informs a little bit of how you react to others. So, this I found, like, again, whatever you think of the Doctor's actions here, I found Davison's performance great, Ainley's performance great. The moment is certainly dramatic. It is a big moment. It feels like a big moment in both the episode and the series. And I, naively as a kid, sort of thought this was it. This is the Master's gone,
mm,
um, which was a dumb thing to think because he comes back, not even like a year later, and then in Mark of the Rani. And I really got to say, like, it was. I felt that was very cheap, the way they did that. Like, and I hate to sound like the Kathy Bates character in Misery, but start where you left off, right? You left off with this super dramatic moment. Instead, in the Mark of the Rani, he kind of walks out, has some pat line about I'm indestructible, and then just have the episode, which is fine. It's not continuity is supposed
I,
to make things better, but it's really like you can't just do that. Like you need to earn it. Like he's burned to a crisp. Start there, and then there's ways to write it. You're a time travel show. It's sci-fi. You can do anything, but make it better than
Pete,
that.
dying is for other people. That's see, this is the other thing that Moffat liked to say about the Master, and I think maybe this is why we were talking about it, was that he was like, I would always watch the Master come back, like after being apparently killed forever in the previous episode, and he'd say, cannot kill me, Doctor, and Moffat would be sitting there as a kid going like, yep, that's good enough for me. That's
Well, I'm just
so
saying on the record, it's not good enough for me. And again, I don't want to go. And I think we could do a whole episode on this, but maybe this is it. But I really respect how Russell T Davies handled this, and this is admittedly a thing he created on his own with the Daleks. And there's a very strong continuity between when the Daleks return and what happened to them in the Time War and how they bit by bit, episode by episode, sort of come back, right? Usually they're destroyed once and for all again at the end of it, but it's not just an afterthought. It is earned. It's explained. It makes sense within the universe,
right.
and really, like I think that does matter to really trying to feel the stakes as you go along, and it also shows that the fans that you care about them keeping track of things and the things that um, you have set up in the past. I mean, everything's an opportunity, right?
I
And I
agree.
think when you miss those opportunities, you don't just miss an opportunity to good story. You miss an opportunity to cement people's connection with the show, and it was really really
Well,
missed after this episode.
you hear that, Chris Chibnall? Next time the Master comes back, we want an explanation for how he evaded his death the last time, and maybe a line that will explain how he's managed to evade deaths all of these times when he or she was seemingly, in inescapable doom.
Well, and make it part of the show,
We'd love to
right?
get the backstory.
Like even make it
Yeah,
like the Keeper of Traken is a good example of
yeah,
this, where it's all about that, and he restores himself, and he becomes this new person. But we digress in other episodes. Um, so the Master's burned away. There's a nice moment between the Doctor and Perry in the TARDIS a moment later, where she asks him if he's okay. He responds in proper British form, "I'm all right." And then
it is
they
very British here.
they come back to the ruin where everyone was. Turlo's gotten everyone on board the Tryon ship. Talked to. We've already met this Tryon Pratt and his jumpsuit, who's apparently
who,
some
who
kind
just
of,
happened to be on the TARDIS. Like that's the first time we see him.
which is so weird. And I don't want to go too hard. Like he's there for two scenes, but he comes into the TARDIS one, which is like, okay, fair enough. Turlo left the door open, but he just has no reaction whatsoever to this being a TARDIS, and bigger inside than outside. He's just kind of like concerned with Turlo and his role in the show of, being the triad guy who rescues everyone.
That reminds me that Perry is sort of robbed of her moment of it's bigger on the inside, right? Because she's brought in there unconscious, and then she just sort of accepts it. Yeah,
that never occurred to me. That's true. She's just kind of there, and she's like, "Oh yeah, this is the TARDIS." Okay. I mean, I guess really the first TARDIS she's more aware of is the Master's TARDIS as a TARDIS, if you think about it.
It's like, oh yeah, I guess this is just what things are like. It's weird to see her accepting it like that.
Luckily, that the Tryon guy is only there for 2 scenes. Speaking of guys who would not make a good companion, that guy is definitely one. Although, if you accept that he's come in to play Pratt, he does it really, really well. And the Doctor says goodbye to Turlo. It's a big moment. They shake hands.
A big moment, and it's done with a handshake, which is so old Who. It's like the first 5 Doctors at least were definitely not huggers.
No. Yeah. You also just feel like those two characters, they're not. I just don't see it. You know what I mean? Like he's not. Yeah, it's not like Tennant and Mickey or whoever. So he says goodbye. It's a fairly nice scene, and it's nice that Turlo very unofficially passes the torch to Perry. He actually says, "Take care of him." And she's like, "Well,
he really does get in the most awful trouble," or something like that. It's very sort of understated, dry, witty British line.
And so Perry and the Doctor, they hook up. They get there. She has to just very mild convincing, and honestly, like you got to look at these two people, like Peter Davison, Nicola Bryant, in the TARDIS together, and they've certainly made more of sort of romantic entanglements in the new series. But you just think, oh yeah, those two in that phone booth, yeah, they're doing it.
And for 3 months, apparently, because that's her vacation time that she's got left. She was going to go to Morocco with random dudes, but now she gets to fly around the universe with a random dude.
Yeah, well, it works. It works somehow. So then she has the requisite, the TARDIS just suddenly moved really quickly, or shook up, and we all had to hang on to the console room for a second moment at the end. The welcome aboard Perry.
Yes, welcome aboard Perry. This is what happens. It's a bit of a shaky ride, but I'm sure it's okay. I won't die in the next episode or anything.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, in my mind, there is a whole season, and I think this has been borne out from various non-canonical works, novels, Big Finish stuff. But there's very few times. There's a lot of times, but then in more recent Doctor Who, in 80s Doctor Who, and John Nathan Turner Doctor Who, there's not a lot of room between episodes for extra stuff. They kind of really have to sort of shoehorn those other adventures. And there's places for them, and they kind of make sense when they're written. But there's a great gap, I think, between Planet of Fire and Caves of Androzani. And in my mind, there's a lot of adventures between the Fifth Doctor and Perry between those two stories.
That would make sense.
So off they go on those adventures, which are either exist in my mind or in those non-canonical spots. And then the Caves of Androzani is queued up next, which is more desert terrain, which is opportunity for more skin, of course, which is all they were thinking about this time.
Indeed. Yeah, it's... I'm really glad that the randomizer took us here for a lot of reasons. I'm glad I got to see the start of Perry again. I'm glad I got to discover how bad her American accent was. Glad I got to be reminded of what the end of Turlo's story was. Because I had that vague memory that was wrapped up, but not exactly how. Still not 100%, but okay, political prisoner, supposed to go to prison planet, but now home planet is all groovy again, and they don't have political prisoners, so he goes home. Yeah, okay.
It works. So would you say
fair? That's satisfying.
So if you had to choose, is this story a Dalek or an Ogron?
I'd have to say Ogron. On
Ogron?
balance,
What? I thought you said you were liking it.
Yeah, I think in terms, I do somewhat, but in terms of, I'm thinking in terms of like stream it or skip it. I'm thinking of our listeners as people who might be tempted by a good Davison serial, and they're wondering should they watch Planet of Fire. I think if you like, so bad it's good Doctor Who, this might be high on the scale. Just because moments like the Tiny Master and the chameleon weirdness, it doesn't drag. There's a lot going on, and even though the Sarn stuff is weird and not really fleshed out enough, I think if you go in with low expectations, it might be okay. But overall, I guess also if you're watching Doctor Who for the important episodes, like you have to include one where the Master maybe dies and companions get swapped. So yeah, okay, maybe I'll revise it. I'll make it half a Dalek. How about that?
Half a Dalek. It's like a Dalek without the shell.
Yeah.
I got you. Can only exterminate with claws. Yeah, it's definitely, for me, it's definitely a Dalek. I definitely would not recommend it to a casual viewer of either the new series or someone who barely knows the old series, like to start with this one. I think this is a really good Davison era wrap up. I think if you've seen a few Davison episodes, whatever they are, particularly if you've seen Modern Undead, definitely watch Planet of Fire. I think it bookends Modern Undead quite well because you get back to that Turlough as being interesting. They even make direct reference to some of the lines, like there's like the in Modern Undead they talk about Turlough's handler being some lawyer or solicitor somewhere in London, and they actually mention that again.
Yes, Chancery Lane.
Yeah, they even name check a location. All that works. I hear what you're saying. So bad it's good there, and I think that's true though. It is good. Like that's why I was so into that crazy moment where it's like Tiny Master. It as an episode where you get to have like two Master reveals, and they both kind of work and are shocking on different levels. I've got to give it points for that. And really just that whole last episode and the darkness where you is very satisfying in terms of a performance and sort of challenging the viewer on sort of what they should think of the Doctor and what he's doing here. And that goes even further in the next episode, of course. But it's
definitely, if you want to see how oversexed the classic serial could get while they play everything completely chaste, this sort of runs up against the limits of that, I think. Like, this is probably one of the most skin-filled episodes of Doctor Who that isn't even, trying to be saucy in any way. But it is definitely, as the kids would say these days, thirsty.
Yep. Come for the time travel. Stay for the skin and sex toys. That's a tagline for this episode. If I've ever, it's just as good as the Master. I
think we definitely cemented this podcast being PG-13.
Yeah,
during this episode.
We might have to drop that everyone label. All right. Okay. Well, that was Planet of Fire. Good chatting about it with you. What will our next episode be, Chris? What do you think? Should we fire up the randomizer?
Let's do it. Okay.
Right.
Are you doing it or should I?
Why don't you? You've got the technology, man.
All right.
Your browser, I think, is a little more up to date than I am. I've got to update.
So we need a random number between 1 and 28.
38. 38. So we have 26 of the original series. The OG seasons are 26, and then there's 12 of the new series. So we got 38 seasons of Doctor Who.
Right.
And counting.
And we are including the TV movie as the last serial of the McCoy, right. Sylvester McCoy era.
Season 26.
So, okay. Generate 20 is the number. Season 20.
Wow. We're still in Davison. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, embarrassment of
Okay.
riches for me. Go ahead. I've got season. Oh, so we have one. We have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, including the five doctors. So we have Arc of
Including the
Infinity,
fact we have
Snake
to include
Dance, Modern Undead,
it.
Terminus, Enlightenment, King's Demons, and the five doctors. Oh my goodness, so many
It
good
would be
ones.
so weird. It would be so weird if we went to Modern Undead after
Right?
this.
That'd be a weird bookend, reverse bookend. So seven of them. What do we got? Let's do it.
All right. Min 1, max 7, generate 6.
The
The
King's
King's Demons!
Demons. Not.
Wow.
Wow.
The randomizer
Wow.
loves chameleon.
Clearly, yeah. Wow. You know what? You've heard of the chameleon curse, right?
No.
Where everyone who worked on that prop in some fashion, or had something to do with it, it's like King Tut's tomb. They all died
Oh my God.
within a certain number of years of that happening. The only person who survived apparently is like John Leeson, the
Oh
voice
my
of K
God.
nine, who's obviously lived a long life. And other than that, like it's a cursed prop. So in addition to being the terrible thing that was unwieldy and didn't really work on set, um, it killed people.
Wow. I got chills. The randomizer is trying to kill us.
Well, I really hope after we do this next podcast that we survive to do a third in this new reboot of Pull to Open, which you have been listening to. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, it is at least just 2 parts, so it's a nice, easy lift.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, man. Well, thanks for hanging out with me on this Saturday to chat some Who. And
It's been
thank
delightful.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you have not yet subscribed to Pull to Open, please do. We are a podcast. In case you didn't know, we're also available on Apple, Spotify, Google, all the fine podcast services. Please go ahead and leave a review if you like. Every review, of course, helps our show reach more people, and we'd love to hear from all of you. So no matter what you think of our ramblings about the show, so go ahead, leave a review. You can follow Chris or myself on Twitter. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pull2Open63, or Instagram. We're also at Pull2Open63. Hopefully, you see some more content there soon. Leave us a review. Hit us up on the socials, or just say hi when you see us on your next Zoom call.
Yeah, and we will keep this thing going regardless. I think this is a very, very strong theme for a podcast. I'm very excited about where we go next after the King's Demons. So yeah, listen along. You can find me on Twitter at FutureBoy. Pete,
I
Pete
am
Pachal?
Pete Pachal, Pachal. Yeah, looking forward to it as well. It's going to be great. We have all of time and space, everywhere and anywhere. Any Doctor Who
Where do you
episode
wanna go
you want to go
next?
to. And I honestly can't wait to be challenged by a missing episode. We'll see when that happens.
Ooh, yeah. What will we
figure
do
it
for
out.
that? That's exciting.
We're definitely not saying no to him. We'll figure it out somehow.
Agreed.
But this has been great. Peace, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.